Germany's revolutionary digital approach to teaching World War II. Germany has embraced this challenge through a complete transformation of how World War II reaches its classrooms. Students in Berlin now engage in structured debates where they argue from both angel and devil perspectives on historical decisions, forcing them to understand the complexity of moral choices during wartime. Teachers guide these discussions while students visit actual concentration camp sites, creating direct connections between classroom theory and historical reality. This represents a complete departure from the textbook-based approach that dominated German education for decades. The shift began in earnest during 2024 when the Conference of Education Ministers approved funding for comprehensive digital learning platforms across all 16 federal states. The change wasn't gradual. It was implemented rapidly after studies showed that traditional methods were failing to create emotional connections with historical events for Generation Z students who had grown up entirely in the digital age. The new approach emphasizes contemporary connections to historical events, though educators carefully balance historical accuracy with age-appropriate content. Students examine how propaganda techniques from the Nazi era appear in modern contexts, learning to identify manipulation tactics across different media formats. This focus on media literacy extends beyond historical study, teaching students to evaluate information sources and recognize bias in contemporary reporting. Coordinating these digital resources across Germany's decentralized education system required unprecedented cooperation between the 16 states. Each Länder maintains its own curriculum standards, but they now share common digital platforms that provide consistent access to primary source materials and historical documentation. The system respects regional autonomy while ensuring that all German students receive comprehensive Holocaust education as mandated by federal law. Hamburg schools might emphasize different aspects of resistance movements compared to Saxon curricula, but all students access the same core historical archives and educational resources. The psychological impact of these intensive educational experiences demanded new support systems that didn't exist in traditional classrooms. Every school now employs counselors specifically trained in trauma-informed education who work with students processing difficult historical content. The counselors don't just provide support after problematic reactions. They're integrated into the curriculum, helping students develop emotional resilience before engaging with particularly disturbing material. Some sessions include breathing exercises and mindfulness techniques that help students manage anxiety while viewing footage of liberation camps or listening to survivor testimonies. International classroom connections have transformed how German students understand their country's role in global history. Through live video links, students in German schools regularly discuss World War II with peers in Israel, Poland, and the United States. These conversations reveal how different educational systems approach the same historical events, often creating moments of recognition when German students realize their curriculum includes details that other countries minimize or omit entirely. The exchanges also work in reverse. American students are often surprised to learn how comprehensively German schools address topics like the Holocaust by bullets in Eastern Europe, which receives minimal attention in many U.S. curricula. The technology-focused approach has created significant pushback from educators who worry that immersive experiences replace critical thinking with emotional manipulation. These critics argue that virtual reality creates false intimacy with historical events, making students feel they've experienced something they cannot truly understand. They contend that analyzing primary documents, constructing arguments from evidence, and engaging in historical debate develops stronger analytical skills than passive consumption of digital content. The debate reflects broader tensions in education about whether emotional engagement or intellectual rigor should take priority in historical instruction. Holocaust denial debunking exercises represent another mandatory component that previous generations of German students never encountered. These modules teach students to identify and counter denial arguments using forensic evidence, demographic data, and documentary sources. Students learn to recognize common denial tactics like statistical manipulation, source misrepresentation, and logical fallacies. The exercises extend beyond Holocaust denial to include other forms of historical negationism, teaching students to evaluate claims about Armenian genocide, Rwandan genocide, and other mass atrocities. The goal is creating citizens who can resist manipulation of historical facts, regardless of the specific event being distorted. Germany's digital approach has influenced international educational standards in ways that extend far beyond national borders. The country now leads UNESCO working groups on historical education technology and hosts annual conferences where educators from around the world study German methods. Countries like France and Belgium have adopted modified versions of German VR programs, while nations with more sensitive historical relationships like Turkey and Armenia have expressed interest in neutral platforms for teaching contested events. The German model demonstrates how advanced technology can address historical education challenges that traditional methods struggled to resolve. The psychological impact of these educational changes has produced measurable results that surprised even the program's designers. German students now score highest globally in historical empathy assessments, which measure ability to understand multiple perspectives on historical events and recognize the human cost of political decisions. The assessments don't just measure knowledge of facts. They evaluate students' capacity to connect historical events to contemporary ethical questions and their willingness to engage with uncomfortable truths about their own society. These empathy scores correlate with other changes in student attitudes that extend beyond the classroom. German students show increased interest in international relations, higher rates of participation in cultural exchange programs, and greater support for policies that address contemporary human rights violations. The connection between historical education and civic engagement appears stronger than educators anticipated, suggesting that immersive learning experiences create lasting changes in how students view their responsibilities as citizens. The long-term implications of Germany's educational transformation remain unclear, but early indicators suggest fundamental changes in how an entire generation understands their country's past and their own role in preventing future atrocities. The approach has moved beyond simply teaching facts about World War II to creating citizens who view historical awareness as an active responsibility rather than passive knowledge.